So I went to Vince and I said, hey, we have a heavy investment in Brock Lesnar. We're going to screw this up. Oh, damn it. I'll do something about that. Take over his matches. You produce them. So I started producing his matches, and we just went by the theory of simple, spotlighted, singular. We just kept his matches to that.
He knew. When Brock Lesnar returned at SummerSlam 2025 and dropped John Cena with an F5, Paul Heyman's old warning felt alive again. The crowd at MetLife Stadium roared. Brock had been away for a long time, yet one big move brought the whole building back to its feet. Paul Heyman stood beside him and defended the moment. He pointed at the crowd and said the reaction proved something. He said it proved that Brock was still a huge attraction, even after all these years. For a moment, this felt like simple proof that Heyman had always been right about Brock. But a question grows underneath that excitement. Was that reaction proof that Brock had always been as special as Heyman claimed? And as we uncover how Heyman saw all of this first, use the hype feature and give this video some hype. Or was it proof that Heyman had spent decades teaching the audience to see Brock as more important than everyone else on the roster? Was Brock naturally untouchable, or was he protected until he simply felt untouchable? The longer you look at Brock's career, the harder that question becomes to answer. Brock's aura at SummerSlam 2025 did not happen by accident. It was built piece by piece, year after year. Paul Heyman protected that aura from the very first day he stood beside Brock. He guarded it, shaped it, and defended it, long before the F5 ever landed on John Cena in 2025. To understand why that punch felt so massive, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to a small wrestling gym in Kentucky, where nobody outside the business had heard Brock Lesnar's name yet. In the early 2000s, WWE ran a training ground called Ohio Valley Wrestling. It became home to one of the most stacked groups of young talent the business has ever seen. Randy Orton was there. John Cena was there. Batista and Mark Henry were there too. And so was a huge, quiet amateur wrestler named Brock Lesnar, along with his friend Shelton Benjamin. Look at how differently each of these future stars began. Brock did not walk into wrestling the normal way. Most wrestlers grow up loving the business, watching tapes, and dreaming about the ring for years. Brock came from a different world. He was an NCAA Division I heavyweight champion, one of the best amateur wrestlers in the entire country. When WWE signed him, they agreed to something unusual. They agreed to also sign his college teammate Shelton Benjamin as part of the deal. Brock and Shelton became close. They lived together and trained together. They formed a tag team called the Minnesota Stretching Crew, built on real amateur wrestling skill, rather than typical wrestling showmanship. Brock was learning a brand new craft, and like anyone learning something new, he needed guidance. That guidance did not always help him. Some older wrestlers in the business looked at Brock's enormous frame and gave him advice that would have buried his best qualities. They told him to slow down. They told him that a man his size should move like a heavy, plodding power wrestler, similar to men like Nikita Koloff or Bill Goldberg. They wanted him to hide his speed and pretend to be something simpler than he really was. Luckily for Brock, not everyone agreed with that advice. A sharp-eyed wrestler named Taz noticed something different about Brock. He noticed that Brock did not move like other big men. He moved fast. He moved with real athletic instinct, almost like a much smaller wrestler trapped inside a giant's body. Taz sent Brock toward a sharp mind behind the scenes, a man named Paul Heyman. Heyman had actually been expected to work with a different wrestler, Chris Benoit. Instead, his path crossed with Brock's, and everything changed. Heyman looked at Brock and saw something rare. He saw size and speed combined in one man, a combination that almost never happens in wrestling. When they first spoke, Brock told Heyman that he was highly coachable. That single sentence began a friendship and a business partnership that would last for more than 20 years. It was a real friendship too, not just a working relationship built for the cameras. And that real trust between the two men shaped almost every choice made about Brock's career from that point forward. From that very first conversation, Heyman understood something important about Brock. He understood that Brock's weaknesses, the parts of him that were still raw and unfinished, did not need to be shown to the world. If Brock's strengths controlled every single appearance, his weaknesses could stay hidden. Heyman did not build Brock a wild, colorful character. He did not give him gimmicks or props or a complicated backstory. Instead, he stripped almost everything away, leaving only size, speed, danger, and legitimacy. That simple formula worked immediately. On the 18th of March 2002, the night after WrestleMania, Brock made his debut on Raw. He jumped the guardrail and attacked Al Snow, Maven, and Spike Dudley, showing off pure physical dominance rather than any storyline at all. On the 8th of April 2002, Heyman introduced himself as Brock's agent for the first time. He gave Brock a name that stuck immediately, calling him the next big thing. Heyman described him as a man who could barely feel pain, almost impossible to hurt or stop. From there, the results came fast, almost too fast. Brock beat Jeff Hardy by referee stoppage at Backlash. He won the King of the Ring tournament by defeating Rob Van Dam. He became only the second wrestler ever to make Hulk Hogan submit. Then, at SummerSlam, he defeated The Rock to win the WWE Undisputed Championship. All of this happened within 126 days of his very first televised match. At just 25 years old, Brock became the youngest WWE champion in history at that time. Think about how unusual that is. Most wrestlers spend years proving themselves before receiving that kind of trust. They work small matches, build slowly, and earn bigger opportunities one step at a time. Brock skipped almost all of that. WWE removed the normal obstacles from his path almost as soon as he arrived. This does not mean Brock was undeserving. His talent was real, and his rise still required enormous physical effort inside the ring. But most wrestlers are asked to prove they belong at the top before they receive that level of support. Brock received star treatment while he was still learning how to become a star. Heyman's words and WWE's booking worked together perfectly. Heyman announced that Brock's success was inevitable, and then the results made it almost impossible to disagree with him. Even during this rapid rise, Heyman was forced to pivot creatively. He later shifted the story once again. At Survivor Series, he shocked everyone by betraying Brock and aligning with Big Show instead. That betrayal actually helped Brock, because it turned him into a sympathetic figure for the very first time. Brock went on to defeat Kurt Angle in the main event of WrestleMania 19, closing out a whirlwind rise that most wrestlers never experience in an entire career. Then, in March 2004, Brock walked away from WWE entirely. The demands of a full-time wrestling schedule were brutal, filled with constant travel and constant physical punishment. Many critics used his departure as a reason to doubt him. They suggested that his entire rise had simply been a creation of WWE's promotional machine, built more on hype than on genuine ability. Brock answered those doubts in a place where hype cannot fake results. He moved into mixed martial arts and eventually won the UFC Heavyweight Championship. This victory changed the meaning of everything Heyman had said about him years earlier. Heyman had always called Brock a real-life monster on WWE television. Now Brock had walked into an unscripted cage sport and proved that description was true. His professional mixed martial arts record stood at 5 wins, 3 losses, and 1 no contest. His numbers inside the cage were striking. He landed 68% of his significant strikes and completed 50% of his takedown attempts, numbers that clearly reflected his background as an elite amateur wrestler. His total striking accuracy across recorded performances reached 82%, including a memorable outing against Mark Hunt that showed his physical power had not faded with time. Winning a genuine championship in an unscripted combat sport gave Heyman a kind of proof that no wrestling storyline could ever manufacture. A wrestling storyline can be written any way a company wants. A cage fight cannot be written at all. Every strike and every takedown in that cage was completely real, with no script guiding the outcome. This section of Brock's story deserves real respect. His athletic ability was not an illusion. It carried him to the very top of 2 completely different sports, something almost no other wrestler in history has ever managed to do. But that same UFC success also became something else. It became a permanent shield around Brock's WWE presentation. From that point forward, every opponent Brock faced in the ring was not simply fighting a wrestler. They were being measured against a former UFC heavyweight champion, a man with real-world credibility that no other wrestler on the roster could claim. This let WWE place Brock on a higher physical level than the rest of the active roster, using a very real achievement to support a story that was, underneath it all, still fictional. When Brock returned to WWE in 2012, he was not booked like a normal champion. He was presented as a highly paid combat sports mercenary, someone who existed outside the company's usual rules and structure. His schedule was limited. He rarely appeared, and when he did appear, it felt like a major event rather than routine television. This limited schedule drew heavy criticism. Fans, wrestling purists, and even other wrestlers argued that a true world champion should show up regularly, defending the title against a wide range of challengers, week in and week out, the same way champions had always done business in the past. A normal, full-time champion has to carry weekly television every single week. That champion has to work with many different opponents, survive weak storylines, and stay interesting even under constant exposure and constant scrutiny from fans and critics alike. A full-time champion has to help keep the entire championship picture feeling important, week after week, month after month. Brock's schedule avoided almost all of those risks. Heyman defended this arrangement with a clever piece of logic. He argued that showing a rare, powerful athlete every single week would actually reduce his value over time. He compared it to running 12 WrestleManias in 1 year. If the biggest event of the year happened every month, it would stop feeling special. Constant access, he argued, removes the sense of importance that makes something worth watching in the first place. Heyman also gave a storyline reason for Brock's scarcity. He said that if Brock truly was an elite fighter, wrestling him every week would mean destroying the entire roster within months, leaving no one left to challenge him. Heyman even joked that WWE would end up with 3 hours of him and Brock sitting alone in an empty ring, because there would be nobody left standing to fight. Brock became something like the final boss of a video game. Any challenger had to fight through everyone else on the roster before earning the right to face him. That challenger had to survive rivals, win big matches, and prove real worth long before Brock ever appeared across the ring from them. Beating Brock was framed as a career-defining achievement, rather than a normal, weekly title defense. Scarcity, used carefully, can protect someone's value, but it can also protect that same person from the tests every ordinary champion is forced to face. The negative truth is not that this strategy failed. It is that the strategy worked so well that the active roster began to look smaller and less important next to a wrestler who almost never showed up. Some fans complained loudly about this exact problem, saying it made WWE's regular weekly product feel secondary compared to the world of real combat sports. Heyman managed to turn absence itself into status. Every missed appearance became proof, in the eyes of fans, that Brock was simply too important for ordinary television. WWE's solution to overexposure was simple. They made sure Brock barely had to face that risk at all. Nowhere was this protected dominance clearer than at SummerSlam 2014, when Brock faced John Cena, one of WWE's biggest and most established stars. Before the match, Cena himself acknowledged the destructive force that Heyman had spent years describing. During the match, Brock delivered 16 consecutive German suplexes, giving Cena almost no meaningful offense of his own. The match became a one-sided demolition rather than a genuine contest between two equals. That moment produced a level of shock that a normal competitive match could never have achieved. A close, back-and-forth contest might have been exciting, but it would never have carried the same message. Brock no longer looked like a typical professional wrestler trading holds with an opponent. He looked like a combat athlete who had invaded WWE and simply overpowered everyone in his path. That kind of moment is unforgettable, and it explains why fans still talk about it today, years after it happened. But there is a cost hidden inside that same greatness. If Brock was shown as being far above John Cena, then everyone else on the roster was pushed even further beneath him by comparison. Heyman's presentation made Brock feel completely legitimate, but it also risked making the rest of WWE's wrestling product feel less legitimate by comparison. Opponents facing Brock often lost more than the match itself. They lost the sense that they truly belonged on his level at all. This pattern reached its absolute peak at WrestleMania 30, when Brock did something almost nobody believed was possible. The Undertaker had built a WrestleMania record of 21 wins and 0 losses, a streak treated as one of wrestling's most sacred, untouchable traditions. In the weeks before the match, Heyman warned everyone, over and over, that Brock would end the streak. Crowds laughed. They treated his warning as ordinary villain talk, the kind of empty boast managers make all the time. On the 6th of April 2014, inside the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, the referee's hand hit the mat for the 3rd time. Brock had actually done it. The building fell into stunned, total silence. Nobody had truly believed Heyman, even though he had told them exactly what was coming. The very next night on Raw, Heyman walked into a furious, hostile crowd. Fans shouted their anger over the streak's ending. Instead of backing down, Heyman used that anger against them. He told the crowd they had been foolish to feel shocked, since he had explained the outcome clearly beforehand. He described real physical consequences from the match, including The Undertaker suffering a serious concussion and being taken to hospital, with Vince McMahon traveling alongside him. By doing this, Heyman replaced wrestling's old mystical language with blunt, physical reality. He called the rest of the roster wannabes, wrestlers who had always been too afraid to challenge the streak themselves. He crowned himself with a new title, calling himself the one behind the one in 21-1. That phrase soon became merchandise sold around the world. That single victory over the streak did far more than make Brock look stronger for one night. It placed one of wrestling's most valuable achievements permanently inside his character. From that day forward, Heyman could remind the audience of that moment whenever Brock needed to feel dangerous again. One match became a lifelong source of authority. Brock no longer had to prove his importance during every single appearance, because Heyman could simply remind everyone that Brock was the man who had ended the streak. It was brilliant promotion, but it also became another layer of protection, another reason Brock rarely had to feel ordinary in front of a crowd again. To understand how deliberate all of this really was, it helps to compare Heyman's work with Brock to his later work with Roman Reigns. With Brock, Heyman played an aggressive, outspoken representative. Brock rarely spoke for himself, so Heyman translated his silent violence into words the audience could understand and get excited about. Their relationship always looked like a partnership between equals, two men who had climbed toward the top of the business together. With Roman Reigns, Heyman's role changed completely. Instead of an equal partner, Heyman became something closer to a submissive advisor. Reigns was not presented as an uncontrolled mercenary like Brock. He was shown as a calculating leader, someone who used Heyman's guidance to maintain tight control over his own position. Where Brock and Heyman built their bond through a shared amateur wrestling background, Heyman's connection to Reigns ran through decades of family history, since Heyman had known Reigns' father and uncle long before Reigns ever stepped into a WWE ring. This contrast reveals something important about Heyman's true skill. He was never simply standing beside great wrestlers. He was constantly designing new ways for audiences to understand each different man standing next to him. All of this brings us back to the central question. Was Paul Heyman right about Brock Lesnar? Yes. Without question, he was. Brock's amateur wrestling background, his lightning-fast rise through WWE, his genuine UFC championship, his shocking WrestleMania victory, and his lasting drawing power all support that simple truth. But Heyman also helped build the very conditions that made his own prediction come true. Fast advancement, carefully limited appearances, real-world combat credentials, protected scarcity, historic victories, and constant verbal reinforcement all worked together to shape a legend that felt inevitable, whether or not it truly was. Even with all of that in mind, it would be unfair to end on doubt alone. Brock performed under enormous pressure across two different sports and achieved things that very few professional wrestlers could ever match. His athletic ability was completely real, forged long before Heyman ever met him, back in college gyms where nobody was watching and nobody was filming. His UFC success could never have been scripted or faked, no matter how skilled his promotion later became. His presence continued to move crowds across multiple decades, from a small gym in Kentucky all the way to MetLife Stadium in 2025, proving that whatever Heyman added to the story, the foundation underneath it was always genuine. Paul Heyman saw Brock Lesnar's potential before almost anyone else did, and he deserves real credit for that early insight. But his greatest achievement was never simply being right about Brock's talent. It was building a version of Brock that the wrestling world was never allowed to forget, a towering figure protected, polished, and preserved across more than 20 remarkable years.